OmegaMetroid.com is here. We're so proud to finally share our website with you, giving Metroid fans a dedicated Metroid one-stop shop for the latest news, fan creations, walkthroughs, maps, and of course, the latest episodes of the Omega Metroid podcast. That's not all. If you'd rather listen on YouTube, you can check out episodes there. And if you really want to take your Omega Metroid experience to the next level, consider supporting us on Patreon. You'll get access to special Discord roles, a platform on the website to promote your projects, exclusive bonus shows, and so much more. Memberships start at just as little as $1 a month. OmegaMetroid.com is the source of all this great content. So whether you're a new Metroid fan or a series veteran, OmegaMetroid.com is the place for you. Check out OmegaMetroid.com today.
And welcome to the Omega Metroid podcast from OmegaMetroid.com. My name is Andy Spiteri, joined by Doominal Crossing. How are you, Doom?
Doing pretty alright. Played Samus Returns again in preparation for today's episode for the first time in 4 years, and I did it on the Citra emulator, which I would highly recommend to anyone who hasn't done that yet, because there's a lot of cool little mods and stuff that you can put onto it, and I specifically tried out a 60 frames per second patch on the game, and it just absolutely changes the game for the better. It even makes the cutscenes in 60 FPS, which is pretty cool, because even Dread, those cutscenes are all locked at 30 FPS, so it's really cool seeing all that. Otherwise,
are you like one of those guys I'm like a guy, and I'm just like, as long as this game looks good, I don't care if it's 30, 60, 20, 200 FPS. I'm not really that dude. That's never really been like my thing. But it's kind of like art. Like I know I can see when it's not working well, and I don't like it when a game isn't working well. But I don't know. I always felt like I couldn't really tell the difference between that kind of stuff. Am I just out to lunch here?
I mean, I can definitely tell the difference between 30 and 60, but like I also don't think that like having a game at 30 ruins a game, for example. Like Luigi's Mansion 3, a game that we've brought up, I feel like, the last 3 episodes in a row. I mean, that game's locked at 30, but it looks like a Pixar film. It looks absolutely gorgeous. That being said, when a game does go to 60 FPS, yeah, I think it looks better, and so when you can do stuff like that, I just think it enhances the overall experience, and so, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm here for it. I just, you brought up Luigi's Mansion 3, and like, that, again, I'm just kind of like, wow, this game looks and runs so awesome. It seems to me that it's surprising that it's not on, like, that's not 60 frames per second. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I can't tell. Like, I'm the type of dude that, like, when my video game is running well, I'm just like, this is great. And I'm not just like, yeah, 1080p, 60 FPS, blah, blah, blah. And I know a lot of people are, and that's definitely important. Performance is important, but I think I'm too... I don't know. I'm too dumb to be able to tell the difference between them.
I don't know. I feel like for me, because like I've always been able to tell the difference between 60 and 30 since before I even knew like what frame rate was. I just knew that something looked different, but I didn't know how to describe it. And so once I finally found terminology for that, it's like, oh, okay, this all makes sense now. You know?
Right. Well, one thing that didn't make sense to me, Doom, was the Metroid ROM hack called Balls to the Walls. And it was a fun little romp. It was a short ROM hack. I encourage anybody that has not signed up for Omega Metroid's Patreon yet to go and check out the latest Metroid ROM hack reviews and take a listen to what the heck this Balls to the Walls Metroid hack is, because it's probably not what you expect. I would love to have a full-fledged game like that someday, but that is over on Omega Metroid Patreon, and I believe, Mr. Crossing, that we have a new series incoming to Patreon as well.
That is correct. For all the listeners who haven't checked out our Twitter, which, by the way, you should totally be following if you're not already, we announced a brand new series coming to all of our Patreon subscribers, all the way from our alphas to our omegas. A brand new series that I'm hosting called Item Acquisition, where I'm going to be going through my various Metroid collectibles, which, if you've seen my posts, you know that I have quite the museum, quite the archival stuff in there. And we're basically going to be going over like the history of all this merchandise and stuff like that, my personal thoughts on it, and just kind of like basically I want to do like kind of a History Channel style doc, but for Metroid merchandise. And I already have the first 2 episodes filmed. I'm still editing them all together, and the series will be coming very soon. So stay tuned for that.
That sounds absolutely awesome. You know, when you were describing that, Doom, I was kind of thinking to myself like, oh, I know we're Omega Metroid and we're not Omega Zelda, but like I've got so much Zelda stuff that I was like, I wonder if like any of our patrons would be down for like maybe sneaking some Zelda stuff in there too, because I've got a ton of different stuff. My Metroid collection is not as robust as my Zelda collection, but I feel like that's just because like, I don't know, I feel like there's not as much cool Metroid merchandise in the world, unfortunately. We might be catching up a little bit, but you look at Zelda, there's like all these really old action figures, and like, I mean, there's so many people on Etsy making really cool things. I feel like Metroid just is now slowly starting to catch up, but probably slowly. One thing that I do want is that Kraid statue that our buddy Ryan from Metroid Database has. That thing looks absolutely rockin'.
I will say the lack of Metroid merch, in my opinion at least, it makes collecting so much easier. Because, like, for instance, I also have, like, a Mario and a Doom collection, which, I mean, there's, like, ridiculous amounts of merch, like, coming out, like, on a monthly basis, and, hell, for Mario, probably on a weekly basis for, like, all these different franchises. And it's, like, impossible to get, like, 100% completion, for lack of a better word, which even for Metroid, I'm never gonna get every single Metroid merch like ever released, but you know, because of that lack of Metroid merch, it's so much easier to keep up a consistent growing collection and stuff like that without breaking the bank too hard.
Oh, that's a great point right there, but yeah, hard to get that 100% completion, that bonus ending with Mario merch, that's for sure. I can't even imagine what that would look like. But we are here today to give you the latest installment in one of our favorite sub-series from the Omega Metroid podcast, and that is Definitive Ranking. And we teased it last week during our Ori and the Blind Forest episode, which, by the way, I got like a ton of positive feedback on that episode. I don't know if you did the same, Doom, but lots of people seem to really love that show.
Yeah, we had a couple of YouTube comments as well after we posted it. People were really happy that we finally covered that game, and for good reason. As someone who is very new to that series, I'm definitely glad that I got to experience that.
I was kind of trying to save, like, in my opinion, going into this podcast, like when we first started, and I had the idea for this sub-series inspired by Metroid, and in my mind, I was like, okay, well, like, the big ticket games are Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Hollow Knight, and Ori and the Blind Forest. So we've done 2 of those. Maybe the third will be sometime in the distant future. But for today, I'm sorry, Doom. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I do hope that someday we eventually cover Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which I was just thinking about that because the sequel Survivor was just teased recently at Star Wars Celebration, but that is neither here nor there.
You know, it's funny that you bring that up, because I brought that up on the Champions Cast yesterday when I was recording with Allison, and she's a big Star Wars person, and I was kind of telling her, I'm like, I feel like I'm sick of Star Wars. I kind of need it to go away so I can miss it. You know what I mean?
I definitely understand, especially with like the sequel trilogy, because like I feel like pretty much that trilogy just hasn't really satisfied me personally, but I feel like everything like outside of that realm, I get expanded universe isn't the correct term anymore, but like, you know, stuff like the comics and the video games and like the animated series like Clone Wars and Bad Batch, like all that stuff I feel like has just been really high quality, especially. And again, I loved Jedi Fallen Order. Like I think that's one of the best single player Star Wars experiences of the last decade, in my opinion. And so seeing that there's going to be a sequel now, like after Metroid Prime 4, not gonna lie, it's probably my most anticipated game. Like, that's how much I love Jedi.
Wow. Okay, over Breath of the Wild 2 even.
Over Breath of the Wild 2. I'm saying it right here.
All right. Well, you know what?
Don't at me.
I'll tell you what. We will do an inspired by Metroid on Jedi Fallen Order one day, and I will play it, and I'll lay down my verdict when we do that show. So.
It's basically like a Metroidvania with its traversal meets the combat of a Souls-like with some inspirational exploration from Tomb Raider, and it like mishmashes all these together in a very interesting period in the Star Wars universe without giving away too many spoilers, and a really fun cast of characters that I am very, very much looking forward to revisiting.
Before we move on, does the main character of this game have like a stupid name? Because I feel like that's a proud Star Wars tradition, is to have like
absolutely.
people with dumb names.
Absolutely. So the main character's name is Cal Kestis. I mean, it's a very Star Wars name, so...
Cal Ketchup. Okay. I love
yes.
it. Yes. Okay. Well, let's... we'll put that
Cal
in the bank,
Ketchum.
and we'll do that. Speaking of Cal, there's a new Cow Metroidvania. A MOOTroidvania, as a matter of fact, called Moo Launcher, which I haven't played it yet, but I've got a code to play it, and I'm quite excited to review that in the future. MOOTroidvania. That just wow, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, I saw the pitch that you posted. I was immediately sold on it. I'm like, I need to play this immediately.
Yeah, I tried to. Yeah, it looks awesome. Let's talk about Samus Returns. As Samus Returns is the next game up in our definitive ranking series, and if you don't know what definitive ranking is all about, the premise is simple. We have pinpointed the 10 categories that make up a perfect Metroid game, and we're going to rate Samus Returns on each one of these categories with a score of 1 to 5, 1 being it's awful and 5 being it's perfect, and we are going to come up with one final definitive ranking for this game. And I'm trying something a little bit different here, Doom. I usually, when we do definitive rankings, I have a score in my, like, I've written down a score, and I decided not to do that today. So I'm going to give my answer when we go off the categories, and then I'm going to kind of assign my score based on like how I'm feeling when I'm talking about this. And I'm going to try and do it a little bit different that way. And I think it'll come up pretty high, because I like Samus Returns a lot, but just trying something a little bit different.
Okay. I might try that. I might go the old school style. I guess I'll get a feel for it and see where everything goes.
Well, you're fresh off of playing Samus Returns. I played Samus Returns maybe like 3 or 4 months ago, so I'm not as fresh, but we do have a lot to talk about. We have a lot of categories to dive into here, Doom. So why don't you kick us off, and let's go to the first category, arguably maybe the most important when making up a Metroid game. And that is the world and atmosphere of the game. So we're talking the setting, we're talking the mood, we're talking the vibe. There's no like scientific way to put it, but just the overall atmosphere and world of Samus Returns. What is your score?
I think I'm gonna go. Maybe this is the portion where I'll give my score afterwards and describe the game first, just because this category is so vague and up to interpretation. So overall, when it comes to the atmosphere of Samus Returns, overall, I really like it. However, and this might be where some of my more controversial points start to go in, but as much as I like it, I don't like how it deviates from the initial intention of the original Metroid II. And I might have talked about it on the podcast. I know I talked about it in the Discord before, but basically, on the original Metroid II on the Game Boy, as you dig further and further into planet SR388, you encounter less enemies. The music gets quieter and quieter, more abstract. It turns more into like almost seemingly background sounds that the environment and the creatures are making, and you encounter less natural wildlife as you encounter more powerful Metroids, and it's almost giving off this impression that as you go down in the planet, you're going higher up in the food chain, which means there's less natural life outside of these Metroids. And that all comes to a head once you get to the actual Metroid lair, where it's literally just Metroids leading up to the Queen. And I really don't like how Samus Returns does away all of that. It just shoves enemy after enemy after enemy in your face, and it doesn't have that same level of environmental storytelling that the original Metroid 2 did. Whether or not that was intentional or whether that was just a Game Boy limitation that a lot of players simply interpreted as that, I don't know. That's not my place to say as I was the developer, but that's the way I interpreted it. And
Right.
the way I interpreted Metroid 2, it didn't give me that same feeling. And so I think overall, I'm going to give the overall atmosphere I'm still gonna give it a 4, which I think with everything I just said is still a pretty high grade, because while I don't like that it doesn't stay true to that original Metroid 2, I mean it still feels like a Metroid game here and there. You're on a planet, you're all alone, everything is trying to kill you, and it absolutely nails that out of the park, which, I mean, that's arguably the most important aspect of any Metroid game. And so Samus Returns does that, and so I think in that respect I have to give it at least a 4.
Right. I was thinking the same. I was thinking of 4, and I kind of have some of the same reservations that you do, actually, but I'm gonna save that because I feel like that's more reflective for another category. But I think I'm gonna agree. I'm gonna give it a 4, and one thing about this world, like the planet SR388, is that I think that Samus Returns does a really, really good job at like making it feel extremely hostile. Whereas I would say that with, and I'm so sorry because I'm gonna try not to, but it really is hard not to compare this to AM2R for me. But
oh, absolutely.
I'm gonna say, compared to AM2R and compared to Metroid 2, those games really went for an atmosphere of like it's dark and it's tight and it's suffocating, with the design of that world, and I don't think that Samus Returns went for that. I think it went in a different direction, and what it did is it just created a very hostile environment where like a lot of the enemies are quite aggressive, a lot of areas that are quite hazardous to you. I do think that there are some areas in this game that are pretty unsettling and just kind of, they give you that classic Metroid vibe, particularly like when you're in the caves and you see all the purple acid that's around, and then especially at the end of the game when the sky is green and, you're just like, is something not quite right here? Like, I don't know. So I do think that it does a good job at conveying what Metroid 2 was going for in a different way, where it didn't just replicate what Metroid 2 was doing, because I really don't think that the game could have just, had like black, dark backgrounds. So I think that the world is, like, the whole vibe and the aesthetic is, it's pretty strong for a Metroid game, but it's different than a lot of what we're used to. It's almost like I was kind of thinking about this in Super Metroid. When you go into Green Brinstar, it's probably like the most friendly, I guess, if you want to say, like, area. It's like has kind of uplifting music. It's got like kind of, like lighter colors and stuff like that, but it's still very hostile, and that there's lots of like different enemies coming at you, different puzzles. I almost feel like Samus Returns is like almost like an entire game comprised of that, where like everything doesn't look incredibly ominous, but it's just like you're fighting for every inch that you progress forward.
It's
yeah,
very
I agree.
it's very combat focused compared to a lot of other 2D Metroids of that time.
I think that, I think it's easily the most focused on combat of any 2D game, probably even more so than Dread, really.
I don't know about Dread. I think the thing with Dread is that I'd say it's equally, if not more, combat focused, but that combat is just so refined that it just, you don't even notice it because it's so perfectly integrated into the gameplay IMO. But we'll get to that when we actually talk about that category.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go and give it a 4, and so Doom, you've given it a 4 as well. So we're at a pretty good start here. Let's talk about the art style, and this is where I'm gonna dock it just a little bit. and I'm going to give it a 3. And I kind of went back and forth with this because my opinion on this has changed over time. But I do first of all, let's talk about what really works, and that is the design of Samus herself. Samus, I don't think has ever looked better than, at least at the time, than she did in Samus Returns. Particularly the gravity suit just looks so awesome. The official artwork for Samus looks so wicked, like the sleek metallic suit. Like, Samus has never looked better. All the enemies look really, really great, which we'll talk about more so when we get to the actual enemies. The Metroids themselves look great. The ship looks great. I will say, though, that I don't really love the design of Proteus Ridley. I think he kind of looks like a little bit of a goof. But
I think he's too purple.
You know what? It's funny you say that, because I felt the exact same way. I was just like, make this guy either like Ridley or make him Meta Ridley, not like this in-between kind of... And I get that that's the idea, but I don't know. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for me. So.
Well, even in Super Metroid, he's not that purple. It wasn't like until Other M where they like gave him that NES kind of throwback color. I kind of wish they would just be like dark gray or like pure metallic black, like Super in the Prime series.
Yeah. So, I mean, Ridley aside, I think that the one thing that... And I was going through, or I was debating myself if I was going to dock world and atmosphere at this point, or if I was going to dock art style, and I ended up on art style. But, you know, I read an argument a long time ago that made me kind of roll my eyes, and it's just like, this game is too bright. And I was just like, oh, whatever, right? Like, that's so dumb. But after playing AM2R a lot, after playing Metroid II, what was it, last year when we did it for Definitive Ranking, there is something to be said with how kind of upbeat most of this game looks. And it looks great, but maybe it kind of... Maybe I should have docked Atmosphere this, actually, now that I'm saying it. But... I do feel that it kind of... I don't know. It doesn't take away, but it feels like not as... I don't know. Maybe you can help me out with the word here, but it feels a little bit too friendly, maybe, in a way. Even though I just finished describing how hostile this game is.
I was about to say, like, it's two colliding philosophies. You have the game that's trying to depict itself as being hostile... And, you know, the whole game, you know, you're digging deeper and deeper into the planet. Theoretically speaking, it should be getting darker and darker and more, you know, more threatening. But the environments don't necessarily, or at least the art direction of the environments don't really reflect that.
I'm almost wondering if, like, my gripe is with the world and atmosphere versus the art style. I mean, they're so, you know, they really do go hand in hand. But, yeah, I feel like the art style for everything is very bright. It's not it's certainly not bad. Like I said, a lot of things look awesome. A lot of the environments look awesome. The background looks awesome. And just like graphically, like we were talking about earlier, I think that this is a very, very impressive looking 3DS game, which also falls into, you know, art style. But yeah, something is just a little bit off about it, and maybe you put into words what I couldn't do, where it's like two conflicting themes going at it. We're like, you know, we're trying to get this dark and disturbing tale of genocide against Metroids, but we're also trying to make sure that everything is bright and clear enough for you to see all these enemies constantly coming at you. So, yeah, I'm gonna give it a 3. What about you, Doom?
Pretty much took the words out of my mouth. I'm also gonna give it a 3 for pretty much all of the reasons you just listed. I will say, Gravity Suit, mwah! Easily, Samus Returns Gravity Suit is like easily in my top 3 all-time Metroid suits. I mean, it's just absolutely phenomenal. Dread's Gravity Suit doesn't even touch it. Don't come at me with that. One thing I will say, adding to the art direction conversation, the game uses a lot of browns and dark yellows, a lot of the environments, and I think it works. I think it works for the Chozo Ruins area, but I think it's overused in a lot of the other areas, and it can make a lot of the areas feel samey, even though they appear like levels apart from each other. Like for example, you have the tutorial level, then you have the Chozo Ruins, then you have Area 2, which, you know, it starts to get more into a dark blue, but then Area 3, you're in the mine level, and you're back to those bright yellows and dark browns that kind of mesh together again, and so... having that for like an area or two is fine, but it permeates so much of the game that it really just makes the art direction of all of these areas as a total just feel really dull, rather than having them for a couple areas and having them feel like really unique and fresh.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to bring that up during our areas talk. It's almost like, you know how when, you know how there are a bunch of people making fun of the Batman for having like that orange filter on it? I feel like this game has like a constant kind of bright yellow brownie filter on everything, everywhere, at all times.
Mm-hmm.
It's very noticeable to me when I play this game. And I'm not sure if that's due to any kind of, technical limitations on the 3DS. I suspect it probably is. But it is there, it is noticeable, and, it is what it is. It's certainly not anything that breaks the game, but, it does stick out a little bit. So, yeah, okay, well, we're both 3s, we're both 4s. Let's see if we stay on the same page here, Doom, because we're talking about the story next. And in one hand, it's kind of cheating, because, like, this isn't necessarily an original story, but there are some elements in this that I really do like, so I'm going to give it a 4. I really love the idea, and it's such a small thing, but I love the idea that there is reason given to why this acid rises and falls in this world. I love that there's like these Chozo seals that you have to put Metroid DNA into. I think that it's like such a small little touch, but it works out so well. And in fact, Dr. M64, who did AM2R, was also praising this mechanic, and I think he said, like, I wish I would have thought of this. So I really love that. And there is the story about, where we would meet who we now know as Ravenbeak, and find out that he is kind of usurping, the Metroids on, or the Chozo on SR388, and, we really set up Metroid Dread beginning in Samus Returns. So there is that element of the story as well. They do introduce the X at the end of the game, which I do like. And this is kind of like going into gameplay a little bit as well. And it's not necessarily a new story, but I love this. That when you rescue the baby Metroid is with you, and actually like part of the game. Like he's the Metroid actually gets rid of blocks in the environment for you. So I really love that. And I also like that Ridley shows up. And I know that that's actually a detracting point for some people, but I was just like, all right, this is awesome. I like it. And to me, it kind of felt like a small little attempt to bridge the gap between Prime and 2D, which maybe we're looking into that, Doom, but to me, I really liked it. So I'm going to give it a 4 as well, just because the original story is really solid.
Well, I actually don't think you're looking too hard into those Prime connections, because even the game, like, for a 2D Metroid, it has a surprising amount of, like, Prime throwback tracks, including some tracks directly ripped from those Prime games, like the boss defeat theme from Echoes, which plays in the item rooms, and of course you have the item collect themes and whatnot. But, yeah, it's kind of hard to give a grade to the story, because, like, Metroid 2, it's really not much of a story. It's more just like a basic plot synopsis, and the game more or less follows that. But I guess, again, going off of kind of how I don't like a lot of the deviations this takes, I'm probably going to give it a 3. Although I will say, you mentioned the new lore given to the Chozo acid, which I also really love. I'm glad we have like an actual canon reason for that, because I was never a fan of like, the magma just conveniently changes every time we, kill the Metroids. Like, obviously it makes sense for the time, but having like an actual story reason behind it now, and like really happy to have that. But yeah, just overall, I don't know, like the basic story, it's still there, and I don't know, I wish it followed more of the AM2R and original Game Boy progression of the story and kind of that aspect. I will say though, and I've talked about this on the Discord, while I don't like Ridley appearing at the end in terms of this game's story, putting that aside and just putting that fight in a bubble, probably my favorite Ridley boss fight. It's so good. So good.
So you prefer like just the more direct kind of premise of Metroid 2 AM2R over this?
Yeah, and I guess this kind of ties into the atmosphere as well, because the thing about the original Metroid 2, Cause like when you go back to Zero Mission versus the original NES Metroid, I really don't think there's a reason to visit NES Metroid outside from pure curiosity. Because in my opinion, Zero Mission does everything NES Troid does and more, but better. Whereas, while I think Samus Returns is overall a better game than the original Metroid 2, there's still so many unique aspects of that original Metroid 2 that has never been done in any other Metroid game. Even AM2R, I will say, and you know how much I love AM2R, and that just makes that original Metroid 2 so special to me, despite many of its shortcomings. And one of the biggest things is that ending sequence where, there's no big surprise final boss at the end, there's no escape sequence, it's this kind of bittersweet yet almost beautiful sequence where it's just you and the baby Metroid just going back to your ship as you reflect on your journey, and you question, like, was this the right choice to make? We just genocided an entire species, but we decided to spare this last one. Are we regretting this now? And there's so much, and again, I don't know how much of this was, intentional by the developers to inflict on the player, but I've seen a lot of other people who've played Metroid 2 that had these exact same thoughts, so I feel like that has to be somewhat relevant. And Samus Returns isn't really like that. It's kind of if original Metroid 2 is the original Star Trek, Samus Returns is the J.J. Abrams reboot, which, it looks pretty. It's still, it's still a fun time, but it doesn't have, those same kind of vibes, to use professional words.
I think I might actually go the opposite of you, and I would have agreed with what you said, I think, until about a year and a half ago, where I was like, there's probably no reason to ever play Nestroid, and there might be a reason to play Metroid 2. I actually think that there's probably more reason to play Nestroid now than there is to play, because that's a very different game than Zero Mission or anything like that. So it's funny that you say that. But let's move on. Let's talk about pacing and progression. And this is a very subjective category, but it's one that I feel is important to a Metroidvania, because there's such a fine line between, like, getting an item and realizing, like, now that I have a new item, there are 3 or 4, areas that I can think of that I was stuck at before that I can progress in, versus there are Metroidvanias where you get an item and it's like, well, where the hell do I go now? So it's very, and Metroid Dread was such a good example of perfect pacing, where it would lead you to the next thing that you needed to get and take you to, a teleporter or whatever. And I feel like Samus Returns does a good job of this as well. There's never really any one point where you get an item and it's just like, I don't know where to go. And some of that is kind of due to the nature of Samus Returns in Metroid 2. It's just more of a, it's more of a straightforward, like, going area by area. So, like, there's not as much kind of backtracking as there is in other Metroid games. So it is a little bit more easy to get away with that in a game structured like Metroid 2. But I even that, I think the Samus Returns does a good job of just kind of making sure that the player always knows where to go, is never really that lost, and keeps you moving without really ever bogging you down or getting you stuck. So I think I'm gonna give it another 4. I'm gonna throw out that 4, Doom.
Yeah, I'm gonna put another 4 right next to there as well to match the theme that we have going here. Yeah. I don't think the progression quite matches Metroid Dread, but again, that makes sense because, Dread's a more refined concept. But I think for what Samus Returns is, it's fine. Really, the only criticism, and I'm putting big quotations around criticism, is I think there's some areas of the game where you'll collect, like, 2 or 3 items, like, in quick succession, and then there'll be a large gap before you collect your next round of items, and that can be a little but it's also not that big of a deal at the same time. So, yeah, that's really all I have to say on that.
Yeah, I think that's valid. I mean, you go to, I think it's like Area 5 has, like, the phase drift, the plasma beam, the gravity suit, the screw attack. Like, there's just, like, an outrageous amount of items in there. But I also don't really think that hampers the pacing and progression really too much either, because you can kind of, especially like later areas, you can blitz through them pretty fast. So it's not like you're spending like a long time in one area where you get really nothing in return. But that being said, I think that that's a valid criticism. I agree. I wouldn't say that this is a I think that Metroid Dread pacing was like the absolute best in the series. Like that game, you always knew where you were supposed to go, or like had a good idea of where you were supposed to go. Even if you didn't know it, the game was kind of subliminally pushing you along. And I think that this game tries to do that as well, but maybe it's just the nature of this game that doesn't quite match that level. But yeah, I think that it does do a good job.
I actually will say something I think this game does better than Dread in that regard is I think the order of items in this game makes more sense than in Dread, because I think that's a criticism we both shared, where stuff like, you know, you'd collect the double jump and then like 2 items later you'd already have the space jump in Dread, and it's like, well,
right,
okay, well, what was the point of that? Or you, I think you collect the ice missiles and then immediately collect the storm missiles right after, 2 missile upgrades back to back, and there's you know, you have moments like that in Dread, whereas I don't think Samus Returns has anything even remotely like that. So I think in terms of like the order you get items, I think Samus Returns actually has a bit of a one-up on Dread in that department.
All right, well, let's keep it going, Doom. Let's talk about the gameplay of Samus Returns. And I have a score. I knew what this score was going to be as soon as I had it, but I'm curious to hear yours. So why don't you take us away?
Okay, so I'm gonna give the gameplay a 3 out of 5. Now, comments, I can hear the comments furiously typing away. I can hear the clickety clack of the keyboards. Here's why I'm giving the score. So, in terms, because this is a weighted score. All right, this is a weighted score. All right, let me be clear. The actual raw moment to moment Metroidvania gameplay, it's really solid, it's functional, it's solid, but there's a lot of mechanics introduced in this game that, until Dread, I feel like weren't refined quite enough, such as the counter mechanic, which it's fine on its own, but because of where the enemy placements are and how often the game asks you to stop and move forward and stuff like that, it makes the pacing feel very slow and rigid. And personally, when I'm playing a 2D Metroid, I like to go fast. You know, I like my
Aren't you the same guy that's just like Metroid Fusion is one of my favorite games?
I mean, hey,
are you kidding me right now?
Fusion is faster than Samus Returns. I mean,
no, it's not.
Yes, it is.
There is no world, Doom Animal Crossing, where Metroid Fusion is faster than Samus Returns. I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off. All on my channel. Go ahead. Ridiculous. What a ridiculous statement.
But anyways, so again, I'm not saying the gameplay is bad. Far from it. I'm simply weighting this grade in comparison to other Metroid titles. And for me, I feel like the gameplay, because like when I'm looking at other 2D Metroids like Dread, Super, Zero Mission, you know, I mean, those are like 10 out of 10 in the gameplay departments, in my opinion. Like, those games just absolutely knock it out of the park. Whereas Samus Returns for me is like a 7 out of 10, which is still really good. I really like that, but it doesn't have a lot of the same mechanics, you know, the controls. And part of this is also alleviated, I will admit, in Citra, because I personally don't like playing on a handheld, you know, on the 3DS, the circle pad and stuff like that. Whereas in Citra, you know, you have a full controller. It makes the 360-degree aiming, which, while I didn't like that on 3DS, it feels totally natural with a controller on hand. So I will say that, but I'm trying to keep the Citra stuff out of my review. I'm trying to review this as if I was, you know, reviewing the official game on, you know, original 3DS hardware. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't want to hear Citra again. I feel like I'm talking to Dak.
That's all I got to say. So,
I completely disagree. This was an easy 5 for me. This was actually the easiest category to mark for me. I mean, you look at this game, and you could argue, yes, Metroid Dread certainly improves upon a lot of what Samus Returns kind of laid out. But I mean, as it should. It's, you know, it's 4 years later using the same engine on more powerful hardware. So, like, I would be concerned if it wasn't improved in Metroid Dread. But you look at this game. There's so many awesome innovations that this game, you know, created. So you mentioned the melee counter. I think that worked absolutely beautifully in Samus Returns. And obviously went on to be a huge part of Metroid Dread. You mentioned the 360 aiming. I think that was like a complete game changer for the Metroid series, and they used it to great effect in Samus Returns. From the way that you fight Omega Metroids come to mind, using like really specifically placed shots with your 360 aiming, just to like a bunch of the puzzles and environments and stuff like that. I think that was like a really big addition to the series. I thought that Aeon was great. It was something new. It was something a little bit different. And I thought that the way that Samus Returns used its Aeon abilities was very like unique. And it gave a lot of like really fun, and this is kind of bleeding over into the items a little bit, but like you talk about the pulse radar, which kind of for the first time was actually something that was able to help a newer player kind of integrate themselves and be like, oh, there is a hidden something here, there's a hidden something there. I think that like a lot of what this game introduced, I think really landed for me and made it like a very like really complete Metroid game. I think it's probably like, yes, Super Metroid is obviously classic, and that's that's probably not going to be able to ever be touched. But when I'm comparing AM2R and Samus Returns, I think that AM2R, for as great as it is, played it safe because it directly just took what Super Metroid had done and made a game based off that. Whereas this game like really took the Metroid series into like a new day. It stepped forward with new ideas and new ways of playing Metroid. And some of them didn't always work. Like I think that we can look at the switching to the ice beam as maybe something that was a little bit clunky at times. But I'm willing to let that slide because I really just liked the idea of, being able to switch your beams on the fly, kind of like in Metroid Prime. Now, the 3DS didn't exactly have the buttons for that, so they did it the best way that they could. But I think that the idea was there to make it really good. So, I mean, I think you look at, even in this game, you look at the way like some of the save stations are implemented, and it feels also very different, but at the same time very similar to how Metroid 2 kind of did that. And it really to me felt like a step forward for the series in terms of how it was played. So I wouldn't say that it's perfect. I think it does have its flaws, and you mentioned that sometimes it can be 360 aiming on the 3DS. I mean, it's certainly not 360 aiming on the Switch, right? Like it's not as refined as Metroid Dread, but without Samus Returns, we don't have that. So I think that this is like an easy 5, actually.
This might just be the category we have to agree to disagree on. However, I do want to add some positivity to this, because one of my one gameplay element I really love that this game does is the grapple beam, which is further extrapolated on in Dread. But I really like some of the additions the grapple beam does in this game, because the last time we've seen that in 2D was Super Metroid. But after you get the space jump, I mean, why do you use the grapple beam? It's useless at that point. But in this game, even after you get the space jump, like, the grapple beam, obviously you can't swing, but there's still like numerous uses. You can rip debris from the walls, like in Metroid Prime 3. You can abuse enemy weaknesses, including on the Metroid Queen, which is how you do the classic powerbomb maneuver in the stomach. There's also stuff where you can like Spider-Man and zip through crevices, which Dread kind of did with the spider magnet and stuff. And so I really like what Mercury's theme did with the grapple beam in this game, and that's I think definitely one of the high points.
Well, I agree, and I was mentioning all the gameplay mechanics that I really liked, and I didn't really even touch on how this game also kind of like we were talking about earlier. Like a lot of this game is really focused on combat and fighting enemies and stuff like that, and it like. Every item that you get seems like it serves a pretty kind of cool dual purpose, and particularly the grapple beam as well. Again, I'm thinking of fighting, like, I think it's the Zeta Metroids or Omega Metroids or something like that, where you can just, like, grapple them and pull them out. And, like, I think that this game does that, like, so well. And the way that it uses its counters, the way that you just feel like this super tank, like, I don't know, easy 5. I think you're nuts.
I think the counters and all that stuff, I think they work exceptionally well in the boss fights, because you're in an enclosed space where, you are naturally, staying put and, being in a closed, confined area. It's when you're traversing the areas, especially if you're going for the 100% sweep, that's where I feel like a lot of those a lot of that stuff hinders. Even stuff like the screw attack, a lot of the enemies that you'll encounter take 2 or 3 hits from the screw attack to take down. And, it might not seem like a big deal, like, oh, what, that's an additional half second, but those half seconds add up, and they, it makes traversal just feel that much more clunky. But anyways,
I see what you're saying, but I would argue that it makes it feel hostile. Like, these enemies are powerful, like, especially on fusion mode. Holy crap!
But I feel like that's
hostile.
That's what the boss battle should do. Like, by the time you're at the end game, like, you should, like, everything in your path should be just pretty much completely annihilated, because at that point, like, I'm not focused on doing the mundane enemy counters. I'm focused on getting the pickups and all that. It's the boss battles, in my opinion at least, that should still test the player's reflexes and their combat stuff, which I feel like Dread does a much better job of that in general. But I've laid out basically all my points now. I don't really have much else to say beyond that.
Oh, I won't argue with you. Just want you to know that I think you're wrong, Doom. I think you're wrong. But
the feeling is mutual.
Let's see if we can get back on the same page, because we've been pretty consistent here with our scores. So let's see what we feel about items and abilities, Doom. And I'm going to let you go first. What say you?
1. No, I'm kidding. No, items and abilities, I'm going to give this a 4 as well. There isn't really many new items, I think, except for the Aeon abilities. I think those are the only new items, actually, yeah. So you got the new Aeon abilities, which I think are welcome additions to the series, and those are really cool. The Spider Ball is probably, yeah. I mean, I get it has to be in there because it's from OG Metroid II. But it doesn't change the fact that it's still not fun to use in this game, even if it's not as unfun as it is to use in the OG game. I will say though, the Spider Ball does make the Diggernaut fight super awesome. It's one of the core reasons why that's in my top 5 boss battles of all time. Because it basically feels like a Metroid Prime fight with the way it's utilized in that. And so I think that's the one cool part of having the Spider Ball in the game. Otherwise, I was talking about the grapple beam earlier. I love the additional versatility that Mercury's theme gave this. You were talking about the baby Metroid earlier. I don't know if that counts as an item.
It's funny because I was going to bring that up. Yeah, it's almost like an item.
Awesome. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's cool how they turn the baby Metroid into an actual like gameplay feature, and how it can take apart walls and stuff like that. And obviously, it will assist you in the Proteus Ridley battle. And so yeah, I think all that. I think the mundaneness of the Spider Ball alone is what drops it to a 4. But otherwise, everything is pretty solid.
I agree with pretty much everything that you said, but I'm going to give it a 3 because I'm giving less leeway for having all of the same items. I don't think that there's like a lot of new exceptional ways these items are used. Like, yeah, maybe the grapple beam. But I mean, other than that, like we've got our classic, we've got the screw attack, we've got the space jump, we've got the wave beam, the plasma beam, blah, 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 blah. We've got all the same stuff. We do have the Aeon abilities, which I do think are quite fun. The charge beam, or not the charge beam. What's the burst beam or whatever it's called? I felt it was really fun.
Which Ravenbeak uses in his boss fight in Dread, which I thought was a cool Easter egg.
Oh yeah, you're totally right. Yeah, he totally does. Yeah, that's cool. So that one's pretty fun. I think the lightning armor is kind of a nifty idea. I brought up the scan pulse earlier. I think that there is the name of it is escaping me, but you can slow down time with one of your Aeon abilities.
I want to say phase shift.
Yeah, phase shift. Phase drift, sorry, is what it's called. And that's kind of cool, but like whenever I use that, I'm just like, I wish that the speed booster was just in here.
Yeah,
like I just
have a feeling the 3DS just wasn't quite powerful enough to render those quick speeds. So that's probably why they opted for the Spider Spark instead, since that's very situational as opposed to the speed booster.
Yeah, so that one's a little bit disappointing for me. I absolutely hate the Spider Ball. It's when you have to use the Spider Ball, I feel like the momentum just kind of grinds to a halt, which is why I didn't give pacing and progression a 5 instead of I gave it a 4. So luckily you can kind of render the spider ball obsolete as soon as you get the space jump. But yeah, I don't really have a whole lot of input to add to the items other than it was a lot of the same stuff. And a lot of the innovation of Samus Returns, I feel like, came with the gameplay versus the actual items that you use. So,
yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, giving it a 3. All right, let's move on and let's talk about the areas of this game. Doom, do you want to go 3 for 3 going first here, or do you want me to take this?
Sure, I'll make mine quick. I'm gonna also give the areas a 3 as well, and this simultaneously is gonna combine multiple categories from like the art direction to the music to the overall gameplay. And Samus Returns has a unique way of progressing through the areas compared to other Metroid games. And you talked about this before, but you can actually beat Samus Returns without backtracking once to a single area. Backtracking is only required to get 100%. It's the only Metroid game, Federation Force aside, where you can do this. And I personally am not as much of a fan of that. Like, it's not bad, again, the game is still very fun, but I much prefer the other, even the Zelda dungeon-esque type of progression that was introduced in the original Metroid II, compared to this, where you had, like, the hub world, and you had each of the areas connected to the hub world. And I wish this game followed that kind of formula, and we'll talk a bit about more of that when we get to the music in regards to specifically that hub world, because I have a lot of thoughts on that. But stuff like that, I think brings that grade down for me. And I totally forgot what was the category we were on. I just totally just went off rambling.
We're on areas, Doom.
Areas, yeah. So I mentioned before about the areas, how a lot of the areas use that same kind of brown and dark yellow color palette that kind of blends in together. Very few of the areas stand out, and it doesn't help that none of them have names. Like, even Dread, Dak and I, we meme on the names of those areas, but at least they have unique names. Everything in Samus Returns is just area 1 through 8. And so it makes it even harder to remember the areas, and so many of the interesting areas are so small, and a lot of the boring areas are super large, and I don't like that. Like the Chozo Labs, for instance, by far the most visually interesting, really interesting in terms of the story and lore areas in the game. It looks so cool. You are in there for a split second, and then you're out, and you're done. And that is just an absolute crime, in my opinion. So that's my thoughts on that.
I agree. I gave it a 3. And I just want to echo what you just said. I hate that these areas don't have names. It's just Area 1, Area 2, Area 3. You guys were making fun of, like, Arteria and Ferenia, but, like, those names are fine, right? Like, they're completely fine, and then now I can say those names, and, like, I don't know what Dak's problem is with those names, but I could, like, completely say those names and instantly be...
It's because they all end with Ia. That's why. Almost.
There's like 3 of them. There's like 3. Whatever. At least they don't all end with Ia as in area 1 or 2 or 3, right?
Yeah, they don't end with a digit.
Yeah. So I completely I can't stand that about this game, and it does make the areas kind of blend together, which is tough because I feel like the music also doesn't really help those areas stand apart, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, look, I feel like you go through the surface area of SR388, and then you go to Area 1, and it's kind of like this ruinous kind of, like you said, like yellow kind of brownish area or whatever, and it's like, okay, like this is kind of the Golden Temple as they call it in AM2R, like this is fine. And you get to Area 2, which it's kind of a little bit more like liquidy, I guess, or like, there's clearly water there, but it's still, I think it's because of the filter that they use. It still kind of looks the same, but at least it stands out a little bit. But then you go to like Area 3, and you go to Area 4, and you go to like it's just like I swear I was already here. Like I'm sure that I was already visited this area, and I think that a mistake that Samus Returns areas makes is that there are a lot of I don't know rooms, I guess, that feel the same in the game no matter what area you're in. So, for example, whenever you go to the caves and everything's purple and acidy and stuff like that's cool, but it's like every area has that, right? Like, so it's like, what area am I in again? It doesn't really matter. I'm by the acid caves. Whenever you go into a heated area, the same music plays. It looks exactly the same, and you could be in Area 1 or you could be in Area 8. It doesn't matter. Now, there are some cool areas in this game. I think that the Chozo Laboratory, which you brought up, what is that, Area 6 or 7? I can't even remember.
I want to say that's Area 7. Okay, I literally just played this game and I can't even remember the order, so...
So I feel like that's a pretty cool area. I just checked. You're right. It's area 7. I think that Area 6 was pretty cool. That's where you have the Diggernaut encounter. But again, like super short, super like you said, you go through it very fast. So yeah, I don't know. Like none of the areas are really that bad, but none of the areas also really stand out and are just like, wow, this area is great. To me, it feels like a cohesive world where like instead of individual areas, like if you were playing Super Metroid, like you can. I don't know if what I'm saying is making sense or not, but like you can pick out like the individual areas and like you could be like, wow, Norfair is great, but maybe not Meridia or whatever. Whereas I think in this game you're either going to be like, wow, the planet SR388 is so cool and hostile or whatever, and you can't really say that about any one individual area because like I feel like one doesn't necessarily stand above the others all that well. I don't know if what I'm trying to say is making sense or not, and I'm not trying to say that they're bad, but they're like
they blend in. They don't stand out.
Yeah. So
I think we're both in agreement there.
Which is too bad because I feel like areas are like such an important hallmark of the Metroid series. But I mean, like I said, it's not like they're bad. It's just that they're kind of samesies, a lot of them. So there you go. All right, let's talk about the enemies of this game, Doom, and the bosses. And I'm going to throw out the big old 5 score again. And I'll just get a negative out of the way here. One mistake I think Samus Returns makes in comparison to AM2R is AM2R knows that, like, listen, we got to fight 40 Metroids. Like, we need something else to fight in the meantime. And so you have, like, that turret boss at the beginning. You fight Ceres. You fight the Chorizo. You fight Arachnus. You fight that, whatever the heck that thing is in the tower. So, like, there's diversity in between your fights with the Metroids and stuff like that. And Samus Returns does not have that. You fight Arachnus, you fight the Diggernaut, and other than that, you are fighting Metroids for the entire game.
Well, and Ridley.
Well, yeah, I guess that's at, like, the very end. But, yes, okay, I didn't count Ridley. But I will say that the actual fights with the Metroids are, like, way, way better than they are in AM2R. Particularly the Omega Metroid, that fight is awesome. Zeta Metroids and Gamma Metroids are both challenging and fun. Even like Alpha Metroids, I think, are pretty fun. The Diggernaut boss is absolutely unreal. That's like such a amazing boss fight. Probably a top 10 boss fight in the series. The way that you have to use all of your skills in that game to finally put him to bed. The Ridley fight is like you said, that's a top 5 boss fight in the entire series. It's got everything. It's got like the emotion, the setting, the music. It's awesome. So that is like an awesome battle right there. And the overall enemies in the game, like the enemy diversity, first of all, is incredible. The way that you can fight the enemies using counters, using your beams, using your grapple, whatever. It really does, like, I think that where this game excels is where you are fighting different enemies. So yeah, this is actually another pretty easy 5 for me.
I'm going to agree with pretty much mostly everything you said there, except I think I'm going to go with a 4 instead of a 5, but pretty much going to echo the same sentiments that you said. One area where I'll disagree on, you mentioned enemy diversity, and I'm not sure if I agree with that, just because there's a lot of copy and paste enemy designs used throughout the game, like those flying bat creatures. I think there's like 3 different variations of those and I think they're located in every single area you go to. So it's like, it would be one thing if there were 3 different variations, but they were like spaced out in like maybe 2 or 3 areas at most, but they're like there throughout the whole game, and pretty much all of those enemy variants, from the Hornodes to the little slug things, like those are pretty much just in every single area. And I kind of wish they diversified the roster a bit more, had specific things appear in certain areas. And you have some creatures that will do that in like the lighter areas, like those absolutely annoying spider things that will explode and take out like 2 or 3 energy takes on fusion mode.
Absolutely horrible.
The absolute worst. Like, those things don't appear to the end game. Those, like, something like that I wish was replicated for the entire enemy roster throughout the game. And then, of course, I also mentioned the counter, and I know you love the counter, but for me, really outside of the boss battles, I don't think the counter worked, just because it wasn't quite refined for those encounters yet until Dread. But yeah, overall, I'm still gonna give the enemies a 4. And then obviously the boss battles, I mean, pretty much agree with everything you said there. I mentioned Diggernaut again is in my top 5. The Ridley fight, despite the story implications, gameplay-wise is my favorite Ridley fight of all time. And, yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that's, again, a really strong category. And you could kind of tell what this game prioritized, right? Like, this was certainly less about exploration and more about, that hostile environment and fighting to get to the center. So, yeah, let's move on. We're almost in the home stretch here, Doom, and let's talk about the expansions of this game. I'm going to give it a 4. I think that, again, so you don't have to get any of these expansions, and in fact, you don't have to backtrack at all, as you point out. But I think that, like, with the amount of abilities introduced in this game, there are some really fun expansions with, like, what do they call it? The Spider Spark, in particular.
Yeah.
Was fun.
By the way, oh, no, go on. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, I was just going to say, like, just figuring out, like, I remember spending so much time figuring out, like, how the hell am I supposed to shoot, like, my way through all this? And the first time that I laid a powerbomb and launched myself was incredibly satisfying. There are some really fun puzzles. As much as I was complaining about not having the Shine Spark, like, a lot of my favorite expansions in the Metroid series are Shine Spark puzzles, and this game obviously doesn't have that, but there are a lot of, like, really fun phase shift expansions that you have to get, and even though, like, some of them might have even been a little bit mundane, I really love taking the baby Metroid and being like, all right, baby Metroid, go and eat those blocks so I can grab this super missile or whatever, right? So I really love, I can't think of, like, a lot of individual expansions in this game, but I know that I've went back, and every time I played it, I've got 100%. I did the Hundo Infusion mode, which was insane. So, yeah, I'm going to give it a 4. I'm a guy that I love, a big part of my Metroid enjoyment is going back and, getting all of the expansions and getting 100% and unlocking that secret ending or whatever it may be. And I feel like it's always fun to go back and kind of, like, this game is a little bit unique too, because, like, you don't have to go back. So, like, if you finally acquire, like, all the items and all of a sudden you're going back to area 1, it's just like, oh man, I feel like I'm like Stone Cold Steve Austin whipping ass here, right? Like, it's an incredible feeling.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a 4 as well. It's actually funny. There isn't a particular expansion puzzle that sticks out to me, but when I think of, like, the Spider Spark, there's a really cool shortcut that you can take in the Chozo Labs. That if you place the power bomb just right, it'll take you from one side of the area to the other side, and just that whole transition just looks so cool. But yeah, that aside, like, the expansion puzzles are competent, but because there isn't really that one puzzle that stands out, it's not like Dread with the ludicrous amount of insane Shine Spark puzzles, or even some of the other puzzles not related to the Shine Spark. They're really well thought out, competent Metroid puzzles that don't really stand out, but they're welcome additions, and yeah, don't really have much to add there. I will say, actually, I will say the introduction of the teleporters, it makes fast travel for doing the sweeps, because before then we didn't really have a fast travel system in Metroid. Having those makes that last sweep so much easier. So I will give props to Samus Returns for introducing that feature.
Yep, I agree. All right, let's move on to our last category, which is the music of the game. Do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first, Doom? I feel like this could be a picky one.
Yeah, well, I mean, I pretty much know what your thoughts are on, because we've had in-depth discussions about this before in the Discord. So, and the thing is, it's funny because I think when it comes to the music, when it comes to our actual criticisms, I feel like they're exactly the same. It's just that the level of those criticisms are weighted differently in our own minds. Because if we're just looking at the raw music in and of itself, and I was hinting about this earlier when I was talking about how I rank the areas. If you're just ranking the music on its own, I'd give it a 4. I think it's a really solid Metroid soundtrack. I think it has a really good combination of these diegetic bending atmospheric tracks with these classic Metroid themes blending together. You have series veteran Kenji Yamamoto returning to do some of the classic themes with newcomer Daisuke Matsuoka, newcomer to the series, who I think did a great job with what he offered, and especially with there's this one track he does in Area 3, and it starts off as a new arrangement of one of the it's weird because it's the Area 1 theme in OG Metroid 2, but it plays in Area 3 for some reason. I don't know, it's weird. But it starts off as that, and then it transitions into this original piece with this haunting diatonic bass guitar in the background, and you have the classic kind of like choirs coming in and backing it up. It's so good. It's one of my favorite tracks in the game. But that's just listening to the music on its own. But when it comes to how the music is implemented into the game itself, I think it's I don't want to say horribly misfired, but I think it missed the mark, to say the least. We were talking about, the Chozo Laboratory, and Chozo Lab's arguably one of the best tracks in the game. I think most people that played Samus Returns can agree on that. It's a phenomenal Metroid track, but you're barely in that area throughout the game. You're in and you're out and you're done. And that track doesn't play anywhere else, so you're deprived of that amazing music, as soon as you get hooked on it. The amazing new arrangement of the main tunnel theme, which nothing will ever beat the original Metroid II tunnel theme in me. That will always be my favorite, but this new arrangement is probably the closest a theme has come to reaching that point, even above AM2R's also amazing main tunnel theme. But again, because that's no longer a hub area, that's more like the tutorial area now. You're in and out, you barely get to hear that. And then on the other side of the spectrum, and you mentioned this earlier, you have the heated areas, which play, the new Lower Norfair arrangement, which on its own is a really good arrangement, but because it just blasts in your face, like there's barely even a transition there, because it just blasts in your face, and because you're hearing that all the time in these heated areas that blend together, what should be this amazing track, you just get sick and tired of it, and you never want to hear it again. And that's where I think the music falls flat, and so I'm kind of stuck in a rock and a hard place. Like, I want to give this a 4, and I also want to give it a 3, but I feel like giving it a 3.5 is too cheap, so I'm gonna say I'll give it a 4, because I know you're probably gonna give it a lower, just so that we can split the difference there. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the music of this game.
Well, I am going to give it a lower score, and I'm not going to lie to you. I was going to give it a 1, actually, but I talked myself up to giving it a 2. And I think that you make some valid arguments, actually. Where, like, if you were to listen on YouTube to this soundtrack, you'd probably start singing a couple tunes and be like, this Chozo Laboratory song is pretty good, or like, I really love the surface area theme. Or maybe you might even say, like, this new updated version of Red Brinstar is nice. But, as my father always told me, Doom, if a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, like, if you don't hear these themes for 90% of the game, it doesn't really matter. And I think that's the point that you were making, and I completely agree with you. I'm just going to be a little bit more critical of the music in terms of its actual implementation in the game. I think that this game has two standout songs, and those are the ones that I just mentioned: the Surface theme and the Chozo Laboratory themes. And unfortunately, those two standout songs are in the shortest areas in the entire game, which really, is too bad. And the areas that I feel like you spend the most time in, areas 1, 2, and 3, it's really just a bunch of ambient, noises. Like, there's lots of dripping, there's lots of critters running around, and it's just like, yeah, I don't know if this is working for me. I think that every time that you go into a heated area, the Norfair theme blaring at you is like incredibly obnoxious, and it actually kind of takes away from the atmosphere. So like it actually does like the reverse job of what I think it's supposed to. And I think that the Red Brinstar theme, I think that's one of the best themes in the series, but it clearly is overdone at this point, right? Like, we've seen it in Prime 2, we've seen it in Samus Returns, we saw it in Dread. There are other songs in the series, and I know that that's probably the most iconic song in the series, but, come on. I think that a real weak spot, if you go listen to the AM2R soundtrack and the original Metroid 2 soundtrack, and you go listen to the final area and then the fight with the Queen Metroid, those tracks are pulsating. And if you go and listen to the final area and the Queen Metroid fight in this game, they're very just kind of generic in a lot of ways. They're just kind of...
I definitely agree there, for sure. Especially with that Queen Metroid fight. I was pretty disappointed that they didn't do a new arrangement of the original Queen fight and instead opted for an original version. Honestly, it was the same way I felt with the Kraid fight in Dread. I was like, oh, this is fine, I guess. But one thing I will say,
actually.
One thing I will say with that final area, I think those two themes kind of missed the mark. The Torian arrangement that they put in there when the Metroids start hatching. Oh my god, that is a pop off moment for me. I love that. That might be my favorite version of the Torian theme to this date. I love that theme so much.
Yeah, okay. Hey, you know what? And I'm not going to completely bury the soundtrack. I think that the music for the Ridley fight is like completely awesome. And the Metroid theme is awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I said earlier, I think we both agree. It's just that the criticisms are weighted differently for each of us, but the actual criticisms themselves, I feel like, are exactly the same.
Yeah, which is very disappointing. I think that. And people are going to roll their eyes at this, but I think I prefer the Metroid Dread soundtrack to this.
I can't quite meet you there. Not quite. I can understand. I can understand where you're coming from, but I can't quite do that.
Well, and I understand that, but in my opinion, I think that the Metroid Dread soundtrack is often solid, sometimes really good, and occasionally great. Whereas I feel like the Samus Returns soundtrack is often solid, sometimes not that good, and occasionally really awful, like when you go into any heated area in this game. So, yeah, I think that this is probably the biggest weak spot of the game for me, which is too bad. Because, like I said, I try not to compare AM2R and Samus Returns a lot, because I think they're going for, very different things, clearly, right? One is an homage to Metroid that's came before it. One is kind of thrusting Metroid forward into the new era, which is, ultimately how we got Metroid Dread. But, there, in my mind, there is just no comparison between the music of AM2R and Samus Returns, which is crazy because AM2R is a fan game. So...
Yeah, and the guy that did most of the soundtrack also did most of the rest of the game, too, which is absolutely wild.
Well, we've come to the end here, Doom, and while you were talking about the music and you finally gave me your score, I quickly went back and I got all of our scores, and then I broke them down into one final counter. Are you ready to hear where we ended up?
Give us the drum roll.
So, in a out of 5 score for Metroid Samus Returns, we have Andy Spiteri 3.9 out of 5. Doom Crossing, 3.6 out of 5. Pretty solid.
Yeah, that sounds about where I'd rank the game. Yeah, seems right. I will say, and you can correct me if you think this is a wrong assumption, but I feel like to me, Samus Returns is how you view Metroid Fusion, in the sense that I still love the game. Like, it's a great game on its own. It's one that I would absolutely recommend anyone play if they haven't yet. And again, I had a lot of fun despite all the criticisms that I levied on this game today. I had so much fun revisiting the game, and I'm super happy that I did that. But
let's just interrupt for a quick second and say, like, with all of these critiques and stuff like that, this is still like in my top 5 3DS games, like, easily.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, it's such a good swan song for the 3DS to end on. Like, I know there's other games to come out since then, but this was like one of the last major titles, and I think it absolutely lives up to some of those other big 3DS titles as well, for sure. But yeah, basically, I feel like the way I feel about Samus Returns is the same way you feel about Fusion, in the sense that while I still really like the game, it doesn't quite meet those same expectations that my other top Metroid games do in that same department. So while I would give Samus Returns like a B, I would give those other Metroid titles an A, and I feel like that's similar to how you feel regarding Fusion. But feel free to correct me if that is an incorrect assumption.
Yeah, I don't know. If maybe I'd need some time to sit on that. I think that I will say that one thing that I think the two games are similar in is that there is one category in each game that really kind of weighs it for me. With Samus Returns, I think that the gameplay is so strong that it really kind of makes up for, the items, which we've all seen before, the areas, which kind of blend together, the music, which isn't all that fantastic. I think that the gameplay is so strong that it overcomes that, whereas kind of the reverse is true with Fusion. It has a lot of things that I really, really love, but the pacing is so awful that it's just like, I want to get to these awesome bosses, but I gotta go talk to Adam, and I gotta go, and that, to me, that game is just like really slow, and it's one specific category in each game that kind of stands above the rest in terms of my enjoyment of that. But I think that one thing for me, because I think that Samus Returns is a top 5 Metroid game, like, in the entire series.
I don't think I'd put it in my top 5. I think it's in my top 10 for sure, but
there's like 13 Metroid games. Yeah. I hope it's in your top 10. But I think that one thing with Samus Returns is that you kind of have to look at it and weigh how much you value what it did to, like, evolve the series going forward, right? Like, I think if you're looking and you're just like, this works, but it wasn't really refined enough, and, like, this was a good idea in concept, but maybe there was a few kinks and stuff like that, I think that you could look at it and accurately be a little bit more critical, as you were, Doom. But I think that for me, I'm giving a little bit more leeway because of, like, there are so many things in this game that are new and that they're trying, and that it just kind of gave Metroid like a fresh coat of paint, as a much needed fresh coat of paint. And I also do think that for me personally, I also can't remove the fact that, like, this is the first new 2D Metroid game that I got to play since, like, Zero Mission. So it also is just like, this is so nice to see this, and it's so nice to, like, see Metroid kind of evolved a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I remember when Samus Returns came out and just how unbelievably hyped I was for the time, because I mean, like you said, it's been so long since we've had a 2D Metroid. Even though I had just played AM2R the year before, which is, based on the same game that this remake is based on, like, that didn't matter at all. I was just like, oh my gosh, an official 2D Metroid, and it very much lived up to that standard, even if I wouldn't put it on the same level as my other favorite 2D Metroids.
Yep. Well, there we go. This, one thing too that we're overlooking. This should have been a Switch game, by God.
Oh yeah.
This was sandwiched in between Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey, and I can only imagine how things could have been different if this would have just been a Switch game. We actually did a full blown episode on that in the archives. And I can't believe that this is not a Switch game. I still actually have a little bit of hope that this might end up on the Nintendo Switch one day, but
I hope so. Boost the internal resolution to 1080p. Give it a 60 FPS bump. Maybe
there it is.
maybe
get it on
some of the
Citra.
Well, no, put it on Switch so that more people can like play the game this way. And honestly, even without those changes, just being able to play this game with a controller, that alone is such a game changer. Like for me personally, just being able to do that even without all the other enhancements. So. Yeah, do it, Nintendo.
Totally.
Metroid Dread's the best-selling game now. This game I'm sure will sell better than it did on 3DS at the very least.
Oh, if they released this game for Switch today, it would sell more probably in a week than it did in its entire run on the 3DS. But I mean, that's a topic for another day. Pretty good game. This Metroid Samus Returns game, I do say.
Very enjoyable, and happy. Another thing is, because I was worried that replaying this game, I was worried that after having played Metroid Dread, that a lot of those refinements in Samus Returns was going to make this game feel even worse for me, but that wasn't the case at all. I came out of this experience pretty much feeling the same way that I did even before Dread was announced, which pleasantly surprised me. And so yeah, for that alone, I'm really glad that I got to re-experience this game and had a lot of fun with it, despite some criticisms.
Well, there we go. Let us know what you would score Metroid Samus Returns on all of our categories. You can let us know over on Discord. We're always down to chat and debate and defend our positions. I'm expecting people to come after you for that gameplay 3 out of 5, Doom. By God.
Oh, listen, I've been echoing that gameplay criticism since the game came out, so I'm used to it at this point. Come at me, everyone. I am ready for the brawl.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are going to get out of here. Like I said, we want to hear what you have to say about our ranking of Metroid Samus Returns. You can let us know over on Discord. And you can let us know over on Twitter at Spiteri316, at Doominal Cross, and of course, at Omega Metroid Pod. And you can check us out wherever you get your podcast. Like and subscribe. Recommend us to that Metroid fan in your life. Tell them where they can get that weekly Metroid fix. And check us out over on Patreon. We got ROM hack reviews going on. We got bonus shows about me and what I like to play and what watch and stuff like that. Doom's coming in with some of his items and his collection, so you definitely want to go and check that out. And that's over on patreon.com/Omega Metroid. Until next week, everybody, we will see you then.